October 14, 1943, 15,000 feet above Schweinfurt, Germany, a German fighter pilot used his pencil to make a mark in his logbook. It was his 17th heavy bomber destroyed, a B-17 Flying Fortress that was now spinning down toward the earth, leaving a thick trail of black smoke behind it. Sitting in the cockpit of his Focke-Wulf 190, he watched the remaining American bombers fighting to stay in their protective groups, their gunners firing long streams of .50 caliber bullets into empty sky, where the German fighters had been just moments before. The simple, brutal math of air combat was on their side. The German fighters could choose the perfect moment to strike, diving out of the sun, and then escape before the bomber gunners could properly aim at them. Without their own fighter planes to protect them, the American bombers were just large, expensive targets. 291 of these B-17 bombers had flown into German airspace that morning, their mission to destroy the ball-bearing factories in Schweinfurt. By the time the sun set, 60 of them would never make it back to England, with another 17 so badly broken they would be scrapped. The German Air Force called it a turkey shoot. The Americans named it Black Thursday, the most terrible day in the history of their 8th Air Force. What neither side could know was that this moment of German victory would be one of their last. In just 4 months, everything would be completely different. The German fighter pilots in the last part of 1943 had every reason to feel sure of themselves. Men like Major Walter Dole had turned the business of shooting down American bombers into a precise science of destruction. They had created special ways of attacking that took advantage of the weak points in the American bomber formations. The standard American combat box formation, with 18 to 21 bombers arranged in a tight three-dimensional pattern, was designed on the idea that their combined defensive fire could keep enemy fighters away. Every B-17 was armed with 13 .50 caliber machine guns, meant to cover every possible angle. But in real combat, the German pilots had found the flaws: blind spots near the nose, limited supplies of bullets, and most of all, the crushing fear that came from being attacked again and again. One German commander had perfected a head-on attack that hit the B-17 where its defenses were weakest. His method was exact. He would approach from high up and straight ahead, dive through the bomber formation at 400 miles per hour, fire a 2-second burst of cannon shells at the cockpit and engines, and then turn away before the gunners in the top turret could line up a shot. The numbers proved the Germans were right. During the first big raid on Schweinfurt, on August 17th, the German Air Force shot down 60 bombers, which was 16% of the entire attacking force. American losses were so severe that they stopped sending bombers deep into Germany for weeks. When they started again with the second Schweinfurt raid on October 14th, the results were even more devastating. 77 bombers were lost or written off. Over 600 American airmen were killed or captured in a single day. The main reason for American weakness was a simple problem of distance. No Allied fighter plane in 1943 could fly far enough to protect the bombers all the way into Germany and back. The main American fighter for this job, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, could only fly about 375 miles from its base. Even with extra fuel tanks, that was just enough to reach the edge of Germany. The twin-engine P-38 Lightning could fly a bit further, but it had many mechanical problems in the cold, high air over Europe, with engines that often failed. This meant that American bombers had to fly the most dangerous part of their mission over the very center of Germany, with no protection at all. German fighters simply waited just beyond where the Allied fighters had to turn back, then attacked with all their force. German pilots called the spot where the escorts left the golden moment. One German ace described their method: "We followed the bomber groups on our radar, calculating exactly where their escorts would have to turn back. The moment the little friends left, we attacked." The bombers knew what was coming. You could see them pull their formation tighter. This created a deadly numbers game. A group of B-17s might be over enemy land for 4 hours, but they only had fighter protection for about 90 minutes. German fighters could attack, land to get more fuel and bullets, and then attack the very same bomber group again as it struggled to return home. Some German pilots flew 3 or 4 separate missions against a single American raid, making their impact much greater. The development of the P-51 Mustang did not start as an American idea, but from a British request. In April 1940, the British government asked North American Aviation to build P-40 fighters for them. Instead, the American company proposed designing a completely new fighter from scratch, and promised to do it in just 120 days. The first version of this new plane flew on October 26, 1940. This early Mustang was very good at low altitudes, but it was not powerful enough above 15,000 feet, which was exactly where it needed to be to protect bombers. The British Royal Air Force used these first models for jobs like taking photos and attacking ground targets, where their good range and low-level speed were useful. The change that would completely reshape the air war came from an unexpected combination of American and British engineering. In April 1942, a Rolls-Royce test pilot named Ronald Harker flew a Mustang with its original American engine and saw its great potential. The body of the plane was excellent, more streamlined than even the Spitfire. What it needed was a more powerful engine. Harker suggested putting the Rolls-Royce Merlin 61 engine into the Mustang. This was the same engine with a special two-stage supercharger that powered the latest Spitfires. The first Mustang with a Merlin engine flew in October 1942, and the results were incredible. Its top speed increased from 390 to 440 miles per hour. Even more important, its performance above 20,000 feet changed from poor to outstanding. The highest altitude it could reach jumped from 31,000 to 42,000 feet. The combination of American mass production skill and British engine technology had created a plane that neither country could have built on its own. What made the P-51B truly revolutionary was not just its performance, but its amazing range. The secret was in three things. First was its exceptional aerodynamic efficiency, thanks to its special laminar flow wing. Second was its internal fuel capacity, which was less than the P-47's, but was used by a much lighter and more efficient airframe. Third was its ability to carry large external fuel tanks that could be dropped when empty, without making the plane handle poorly. The laminar flow wing, designed by North American's engineer Edgar Schmude, kept air flowing smoothly over its surface, much further back than regular wings. This reduced drag by almost 30%, which directly meant it used fuel more efficiently. While a P-47 burned about 100 gallons of fuel per hour during a cruise, a P-51 used only 65 gallons at the same speed. When engineers added 75-gallon drop tanks to the P-51B in early 1944, its combat range extended to 650 miles. With even larger 108-gallon tanks introduced in March 1944, the range stretched to 850 miles. This was enough to fly to Berlin, fight for 20 minutes, and return to England. No other single-engine fighter in the world could match this mix of range and performance. The 354th Fighter Group, nicknamed the Pioneer Mustang Group, received the first P-51BS in November 1943. Based at Boxted in England, they were officially part of the 9th Air Force, but were immediately ordered to help the 8th Air Force protect its bombers. Their commander, Colonel Kenneth Martin, had only a few days to train his pilots to switch from their P-47s to the new fighter. One pilot who flew an early test flight later remembered, "The moment I lifted off, I knew we had something special." The Mustang handled like a sports car compared to the truck-like Thunderbolt. It was responsive, fast, and most importantly, it could fly forever. The first combat mission for the P-51B was on December 1, 1943, fighter sweep over Belgium and France. The first true escort mission came on December 5, to Amiens, a fairly short-range trip. 16 P-51Bs went with the bombers, more as a test than a full protection mission. They saw no enemy fighters, but it proved the plane could work at high altitude. On December 13, they flew their first long-range escort to Kiel, a target 490 miles from base that had been impossible for Allied fighters to reach before. The effect on both sides was immediate. German pilots, who expected to find Unescorted bombers over northern Germany, were shocked to find aggressive American fighters waiting for them deep inside their own country. The last week of 1943 saw more missions as the 8th Air Force learned what the Mustang could do. On December 20th, P-51Bs protected bombers going to Bremen and claimed 3 German fighters with no losses of their own. The German Air Force, still getting used to this new threat, kept using their old tactic of waiting for the escorts to leave. But this time, the escorts didn't leave. At first, German pilots mistook the P-51B for a P-47 from a distance, expecting them to turn back at any moment. When the Mustangs kept flying east, far past the P-47's maximum range, their confusion turned to alarm. Radio messages picked up by Allied intelligence showed German ground controllers repeatedly asking their pilots to confirm what kind of fighters they were seeing, and where they were unable to believe that Allied escorts had come so deep into Germany. March 4, 1944, 25,000 feet above Brandenburg. Through the broken clouds below, the huge shape of Berlin was clearly visible, the capital of Nazi Germany, the city that Reich Marshal Hermann Göring had promised would never be threatened by enemy aircraft. Above it, flying in perfect formation, were 660 American heavy bombers, and swirling around them in protective patterns were dozens of single-engine fighters with American markings. The first American fighter escort to Berlin was more than just a military success. It was a psychological blow that shattered the German feeling of being safe. Colonel Donald Blakesley, commanding the 4th Fighter Group, had led his 3 squadrons of P-51Bs on the historic 1,100-mile round trip. The 4th Fighter Group had received their P-51Bs on February 28, and just 4 days later they had done what German leaders said could not be done. For the German pilots taking off to stop them, the sight was unbelievable. They had been told Allied fighters could never reach Berlin. It was too far, impossible for a single-engine plane. Yet there they were, looking fresh and aggressive after a 500-mile flight, while the German defenders were the ones worrying about their fuel levels after just getting airborne. The fighting that followed was fierce. The German Air Force sent over 200 fighters to defend their capital, but they were not fighting tired bomber gunners. They were fighting fresh, eager Mustang pilots who had the advantage of height and better planes. The 4th Fighter Group alone claimed 15 German planes shot down. More importantly, many German attacks on the bombers were broken up before they could get close enough to do real damage. For the American pilots, the P-51B was a dream come true. One of the top Mustang aces described his first fight in the plane. "The Mustang gave us everything we dreamed of: speed to catch any German fighter, maneuverability to fight them, and range to go anywhere the bombers went." The inside of a P-51B was small but well laid out. The pilot sat behind an inline engine that gave him a good view forward, unlike the radial engine of the P-47 that blocked a lot of the view. The Mustang's cockpit, especially the later bubble canopy model, let the pilot see all around him. One pilot remembered the physical strain of long missions. 6 hours in a Mustang meant 6 hours on oxygen above 10,000 feet. Your mouth would be dry as cotton from the oxygen. Your back ached from sitting on your parachute. Your neck was sore from constantly turning to look for enemy fighters. But we had the ability to do the job, and that made all the difference. The sight of Mustangs over Berlin created an immediate crisis for the German High Command. Reich Marshal Göring, at first, refused to believe the reports. When he was shown proof from gun camera footage, he was said to have remarked, "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." Whether he actually said those exact words is debated, but the feeling of shock was real. The military results were devastating. Every German plan for defense had been based on the idea that their airspace deep inside the country was safe from enemy fighters. Training fields, assembly plants, and aircraft factories had been built in central Germany precisely because they were thought to be beyond the reach of attack. Now, American fighters could strafe airfields, attack German fighters over any city, and protect bombers going to any target in the country. The German Air Force tried different ways to fight back. They created special Sturm groups of heavily armed and armored FW-190s meant to smash through the fighter screen and get to the bombers. But these heavy, slow planes were easy targets for the nimble Mustangs. The Germans tried mass attacks with whole groups hitting at once, but the Americans now had the numbers and the better planes to stop them. The week of February 20th to 25th, 1944, known as Big Week, showed how completely the air war had changed. The 8th Air Force launched Operation Argument, a massive attack on German aircraft factories, with P-51s providing protection the whole way. In 6 days, the Americans flew 3,300 bomber missions and 3,673 fighter missions. They lost 226 bombers, but claimed to have destroyed over 500 German fighters. More critically, the Germans lost experienced pilots who could not be replaced. The American plan had changed from just bombing targets to actively hunting and destroying the German Air Force itself. The new commander of the 8th Air Force, General James Doolittle, gave new orders in January 1944. Fighters were to find and destroy the German Air Force wherever it was, not just stay close to the bombers. One American pilot described their new, aggressive style. We'd escort the bombers to the target, but once they dropped their bombs, we'd go looking for trouble. We'd dive down to the deck, shoot up airfields, catch German fighters as they were landing or taking off. The numbers of losses now heavily favored the Allies. In January 1944, the German Air Force lost 1,311 pilots. In February, they lost 2,121. In March, 2,115. These losses included many expert veteran pilots with years of fighting experience. American losses, while serious, could be replaced by a huge training program that produced thousands of new pilots every month. The P-51 was more than just a long-range plane. It showed American industrial and technological power. The K-14 computing gun sight, introduced in late 1944, gave Mustang pilots a big advantage in aiming. This gyroscopic sight automatically calculated how far ahead to aim based on how far away the target was and how fast it was turning, which made pilots much more accurate. The Mustang's 6.50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, while not as powerful as German cannon, held a lot of ammunition. A P-51 carried 1,880 rounds in total, enough for nearly 30 seconds of continuous firing. German fighters with cannon typically had ammunition for less than 10 seconds of fire. In a long dogfight, American pilots could afford to miss. German pilots could not. Behind all the numbers was a human tragedy on a huge scale. Young men on both sides, many just teenagers, fought desperate battles 6 miles above the earth, in temperatures of -50 degrees Fahrenheit. The lucky ones died quickly. Others suffered horrible burns, lost limbs to cannon shells, or died slowly in parachutes that had been shot full of holes. One American lieutenant shot down a German plane and watched the pilot bail out. His parachute opened, but he was on fire, he recalled. I could see him trying to beat out the flames on his flight suit as he fell. There was nothing anyone could do. A German pilot described how the fighting had changed. In 1943, we were knights of the air, fighting bombers in something like a fair fight. By 1944, we were being hunted relentlessly. Mustangs would follow us down to our own airfields, circle overhead while we tried to land, and then attack. There was no safety anywhere. The mental strain was crushing. German pilots who had been confident in 1943 became deeply pessimistic by mid-1944. Letters home, read by censors but saved in archives, show their growing despair. One pilot wrote in April 1944, "We take off knowing most of us won't return. The Americans are everywhere, always above us, always with more fuel, more ammunition." As spring turned to summer in 1944, the Mustang's long range allowed the Allies to start a new strategic campaign that would choke the German war machine. The systematic destruction of its oil production, synthetic fuel plants at places like Luna and Polotsk, which had been too far away before, were now regularly bombed with full fighter protection. The effect was catastrophic for the German Air Force. Aviation fuel production fell from 175,000 tons in April 1944 to just 10,000 tons by September. Training flights were cut back, then stopped completely. New pilots arrived at their combat units with as little as 50 hours of total flying time, while American pilots had 300 to 400 hours. A German commander with the new jet fighters said, "We had the world's first operational jet fighter, the Me-262, capable of 540 miles per hour, but we could barely find fuel for them. I watched helplessly as dozens of these amazing aircraft sat on the ground, while Mustangs flew freely above us." D-Day, June 6, 1944, showed how completely the air war had been reversed. On that day, the German Air Force could only manage 319 flights over France, compared to 14,674 by the Allies. Only 2 German fighters even appeared over the invasion beaches. Mustangs and other Allied fighters had created such control of the sky that the invasion happened under a protective umbrella, with almost no challenge from the German Air Force. The Mustang's job grew beyond just escorting bombers. P-51 pilots became experts at train busting, using their .50 caliber guns to destroy locomotives. A single Mustang could also carry 2 500-pound bombs or 10 5-inch rockets, making it a powerful weapon for attacking targets on the ground. One famous pilot, who would later break the sound barrier, shot down 5 German planes in one mission. But he also spoke of the moral difficulty of their new role. We went from protecting bombers to attacking anything that moved. We'd strafe trains knowing they might be carrying civilians. It was total war. And the Mustang gave us the ability to take that war anywhere in Germany. Germany's answer in technology was the revolutionary jet fighter, the Messerschmitt Me-262. It could fly 540 miles per hour, nearly 100 miles per hour faster than the P-51, in the hands of a skilled pilot. It could slice through bomber formations and escape before the Mustangs could react. But even these amazing machines could not turn the tide. One of Germany's top aces, who flew the Me-262, recognized the hopelessness. We were like a few tigers facing hundreds of wolves. For every Me-262, the Americans had 50 Mustangs, and the Mustangs could wait over our airfields, attacking the jets when they were slow and vulnerable during takeoff and landing. The jet engines of that time were unreliable and needed long runways. Mustang pilots learned to use these weaknesses, attacking the jets when they were low on fuel and slowing down to land. By early 1945, the math of air combat was impossible for Germany. The United States had built 15,486 P-51s during the war, with about 8,000 of them serving in Europe. At its strongest point in March 1945, the 8th Air Force alone had 14 fighter groups, mostly equipped with Mustangs, over 1,000 aircraft. Against this, the German Air Force could maybe put 300 to 400 working fighters into the sky on a good day, scattered all over the country. Fuel shortages meant many never even flew. Pilot shortages meant those that did fly were often flown by teenagers with very little training. The victory-to-loss ratio showed this imbalance. By 1945, Mustang pilots were shooting down 10 enemy planes for every Mustang they lost. After the war, captured German pilots gave telling statements about the Mustang's impact. One of their top generals wrote in his memories, "The P-51 was perhaps the most significant fighter aircraft of World War II. Until it appeared, we had controlled the timing and place of air battles over Germany. After it arrived, we never got the initiative back." Another ace who survived the war was more direct. The Mustang killed the German Air Force, not the bomber offensive, not the invasion, but that fighter that could fly to Poland and back. We went from being the hunters to being the hunted in the space of 3 months. Perhaps the most sad words came from a younger pilot who started fighting late in the war. "I flew my first combat mission in November 1944 with only 55 hours of total flight time. On my 3rd mission, I saw Mustangs for the first time. They were everywhere. I knew then that we had lost not just the war, but the sky itself." The Mustang's contribution went far beyond shooting down planes. By making it possible to bomb deep into Germany with acceptable losses, it allowed the systematic destruction of German industry. Oil production, which was the German military's weak point, was reduced to just 10% of what it needed by March 1945. The transportation network was shattered, making it hard to move soldiers, supplies, and raw materials. Aircraft production, though still high, became meaningless when there was no fuel to fly the planes and no trained pilots to fly them. The American general in charge of strategic bombing in Europe stated, "The P-51 was the decisive weapon of the European air war. It made possible the daylight bombing campaign, the invasion of Europe, and the systematic destruction of German military power. Beyond its military impact was a deep change in the men who fought." German pilots who entered combat in 1943 as confident warriors came out of the war, if they survived, as different men. Many spoke of the specific moment they realized the war was lost, and it was almost always connected to the first time they saw Mustangs flying deep over Germany. Some German pilots experienced a different change from seeing the enemy as a foe to respecting them. After seeing American material power and the fair treatment of prisoners, many began to question everything they had been taught by the Nazi government. The difference between the propaganda and the real situation was devastating to their morale and their beliefs. The P-51 marked a major turning point in fighter plane design, influencing aircraft for decades. Its laminar flow wing showed how to dramatically reduce drag. The mixing of a British engine with an American airframe created a model for countries working together that would continue long after the war. The Mustang's amazing range changed basic ideas about what fighter aircraft could do. Before the war, the standard thinking was that fighters were short-range weapons for defending a local area. The P-51 proved that fighters could be strategic weapons, able to project power hundreds of miles from their home base. This idea would influence later fighters for generations. The final numbers showing the Mustang's impact are staggering. The loss of German pilots tells the story clearly. In 1943, they lost 2,967 pilots. In 1944, they lost 12,037. In just the first 5 months of 1945, they lost another 4,238. The average experience of their pilots dropped sharply. In 1943, a new pilot had over 250 flight hours before combat. By early 1944, it was down to 150 hours. By late 1944, it was 80 hours. By 1945, it was only 40 to 50 hours. Perhaps the Mustang's greatest victory was in the mind. It destroyed the myth that Germany had better technology. It showed the power of American industry, and it proved that a democracy could build better weapons than a dictatorship. German pilots who had laughed at American bombers in 1943 were, by 1945, sometimes refusing to fly what they knew were suicide missions against Mustang-protected formations. Young German pilots, taught to believe in Nazi ideas, were confused when they faced the clear superiority of American equipment. Everything they had been told about their racial superiority, their technical skill, and American weakness was contradicted by the elegant, powerful fighter that now ruled the skies over their own homeland. Years after the war, American and German fighter pilots met at a reunion. Their conversations showed the lasting mark the Mustang had left on both sides. A American colonel who had flown Mustangs raised his glass and said, "To the P-51 Mustang, the fighter that won the air war. We had excellent aircraft, superb pilots, and were fighting over our homeland. But you had the Mustang, and that made all the difference." A German pilot who had flown both the FW-190 and the Me-262 jet added, "We went from laughing at Unescorted bombers to hiding from Mustangs in just 4 months. No military has ever suffered such a complete reversal." A former German general, his face still scarred from a jet crash, reflected, "We laughed at your bombers in 1943 because we could not imagine America could produce a fighter with the range to escort them to Berlin." The P-51 Mustang taught us the danger of underestimating one's enemies. You ask when we knew the war was lost. It was that day in March 1944 when we looked up and saw Mustangs over Berlin. At that moment, every German pilot knew the truth. We had already lost. The change from German pilots laughing at unprotected American bombers to being afraid of the Mustang is one of the most complete reversals in military history. In less than 6 months, from October 1943 to March 1944, the German Air Force went from being the hunter to being the hunted, from confident to defeated. The P-51 Mustang was the reason for this change, but it stood for something bigger: American industrial power, cooperation between democratic allies, and the strength of technological new ideas driven by need, not by a political belief. German pilots who had been taught that American democracy made the country weak, discovered instead a society that could come together and produce on a scale never seen before. The laughter of the German pilots in October 1943 was based on what they knew was possible at the time. No single-engine fighter had ever shown it could fly from England to Berlin and back. What they failed to see was American skill at solving problems. The successful combination of American and British technology and the industrial power to build thousands of these excellent fighters in months, not years. When Mustangs appeared over Berlin on March 4, 1944, the laughter stopped forever. It was replaced by the terrible understanding that everything the German pilots had believed about their enemies, about their own superiority, and about who would win the war, had been wrong. The P-51 Mustang didn't just win the air war. It destroyed illusions, broke down myths, and proved that having better technology in war comes not from a political system, but from industrial power, countries working together, and the new ideas that freedom can create. The German pilots who survived never forgot that lesson.